because you are in such a sort of significant role at Sasaki, and Sasaki is a very significant firm, not just in the United States, but around the world. What's your insight into what it means to run a firm, not just to be a single person architect and you sort of hang out your shingle, but you're really working on these big projects that are transformative and require a lot of input from a lot of different players. A lot of money is required, and a lot of people get involved. What's your takeaway from running the show for 10 years or whatever it is?
Yeah. Well, I guess what I would say, first of all, is that nothing in my education or in my career prepared me for what it took to run a design business.
Right.
And I don't think I'm unique in saying that. I think that's the challenge that all firm leaders face. Yeah. Unless they came from a different industry. I think they've got it all figured out. Yeah. So running a design business is hard. We're fee for service. Yeah. So you want to be in control of your own destiny. You want to do good work. You want to do amazing projects. Yeah. Yet you're responding to RFPs and you're following the lead of the project owners, to the best of your ability because they're the ones paying you. So, you're in a service industry. It's very different and hard to navigate that space. And I guess what I didn't expect is that it would become something I would end up being really passionate about. And try and improve upon, not only for Sasaki, but for the industry, because I do think there's a lot of room for improvement. Yeah. It's not about greed, actually. I think that's where things get a little bit tricky, especially with designers, is that they get all bent out of shape whenever money comes up.
Welcome back to Unplanned, the show about cities and how they work. I'm Sam, your host, and I just want to say, because of all the videos I see on YouTube, just to remind you, if you like this content and you enjoy this show, please hit the subscribe button for plenty more great content to come. Today we have a great guest, somebody I've known for a couple of decades now, James Miner, the former head at Sasaki, and your new gig at
Design Intelligence. And I think if we're being honest, Sam, it's been our friendship has spanned 3 decades.
Yes, you're right. You're right. Math was not my strong suit.
That's okay.
Engineering, don't worry, your building was not signed off by this engineer, so it's okay.
It's been a long time. Yeah, we were together at the GSD in 2001 when we graduated from the urban planning department.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
It's been an interesting ride since then. That's for sure.
Yeah. So what you been up to? Tell us a little bit about it. So
you may or may not remember when we were together at the GSD. Right. I had spent 2 years in between undergraduate school and grad school working at this wonderful firm called Sasaki. Which my undergraduate degree was in architecture, but I was always interested in intrigued by the study of urban planning and cities and sort of the history and evolution of culture and economics and how all those things combine with geography. And so I went and spent 2 years working at Sasaki in the planning group there. Oh, okay. And it absolutely changed my sort of perspective on design and what I wanted to do. Interesting. And so I went back and got my master's degree, and that's how we ended up meeting at the GSD. Sure. Yeah. After the GSD, this is a part of the story that I don't tell too often, but I actually did not go back to Sasaki right away. I followed a former colleague to another firm and helped them start up a planning group. Interesting. And then went back to Sasaki eventually in 2004. So after about 3.5 years. Yeah. And as I like to tell people, I started at Sasaki as an intern before I did my graduate degree. Yeah. And then I ended up 20 plus years later as the CEO. Yeah. And I think it's been a really interesting path because I literally had done every job in the firm, from doing ink on Mylars back when that was a thing, and running prints at Harvard Square.
Yes. Yes.
To running the planning and urban design group, doing hiring and doing everything else I could think of, and then eventually being asked to lead the organization, which is a great honor. And I did that for about 10 years. Right. Yeah, starting in 2012, 2013. And for about 5 years, I was both running the planning and urban design group, which about 70, 80 people, and running the firm, and running a practice. meaning clients, travel, and having children. So we had 3 kids.
Wow. Oh
with a wife who's a doctor. So we were very, very busy.
Oh my gosh.
And I think what I realized through that experience in that first 5 years post, a little bit post GSD and my other work experience was that I wasn't really able to do any of those things to their fullest.
Right.
Whether that be
how
running a
could
practice,
you?
running the planning urban design group, running the firm, or being a good parent and spouse.
Sure.
Keep in mind, when Sasaki was founded in 1953.
Yeah. Hideo Sasaki.
Hideo Sasaki.
Right.
Yeah, very well known Japanese-American landscape architect.
Right.
A big part of the modernist design movement,
Right.
but one of the few landscape architects who was on par with the really well-known architects of that era.
Right.
So,
right here in Boston. He was based in Boston.
Yeah, he taught at the GSD, and his practice was always based out of Watertown, which was
Right.
the only place he could afford to open an office at that point in time.
Interesting. Because you used to be in a building that sort of overlooked that was right there on the Charles.
Very
right?
cool old mill building.
Was that his original spot?
It was not, actually.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
no. The original studio was still in Watertown Square, but in a different space.
Okay.
And as the firm grew, it was in 5 different spaces around Watertown Square.
Yeah.
And Watertown was not as developed as it is now.
Right.
Wasn't exactly the safest place. So there was a push in the early 70s for the firm to consolidate somewhere.
Right.
And the partners took out private loans and bought this ramshackle old mill on the Charles River.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And that became the office for the next 50 years.
Yeah.
So interdisciplinary design, when Hideo was getting started out in his practice in the 1950s and 60s, was not really part of the nomenclature in the world of professional design.
Right. And interdisciplinary means all parts of the puzzle are kind of coming together to try to solve the issue or whatever.
Yeah,
it is.
the best way to visualize it for you and me, because we were there, is just like what happens at the GSD, right?
Yeah,
so you go to
right.
the trays at the GSD, and you have architecture students, you have landscape architecture students, you have planning students, you have urban design students, and they're all taking studio together.
Right.
So Hideo took that model, quite literally, and put it into a design studio, which was his firm.
Oh, interesting.
That was the idea.
Yeah.
And it was always about creating each practice area as peers, meaning there wasn't one part of the organization that sat over all the others.
Interesting.
The more typical setup is the capital A architecture firms, which will add other services to them.
Right.
And call themselves interdisciplinary, whereas Sasaki was saying, look, we're going to have architecture, we're going to have landscape architecture, and we're going to have planning, and some mix of engineering along the way, and each one of those will collaborate evenly, as opposed to being sort of commanded by one or the other.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, even about your intro, is that the world doesn't think that way.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people would say, oh, Sasaki, one of the premier planning and design firms in the world.
Sure.
And that's certainly where reputationally the firm has gone over time.
Right.
But for me, the reason, if you want to say Sasaki is a great planning and urban design firm, the reason it is not because of the 70, 80, 90 people that are in that group or anyone who's leading that part of the practice.
Right.
It's because they're co-located with architects, landscape architects, ecologists, economists, sustainability experts. That's what makes the planning practice so rich.
Right.
And so I think that's just a really important part of the ethos of the firm that maybe most people don't get.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Yeah. So that was how it started and where it was. And then at some point in the relatively recent past, there was a change or a shift or a new direction or a new rebranding or something.
Yeah, so to kind of play on those themes, we talked about, well, what is the most current version of the firm? If in 1953 it was an interdisciplinary design practice, and now every other firm who has anything other than one practice area describes themselves that way, what is Sasaki? What's our place in the world? And this notion of integrated design is what we really started to focus on. So interdisciplinary, you co-located, you have different practice groups, but are you really integrating the thinking in a holistic way? And can you have an architect lead a planning project or a planner lead an architecture project?
Right.
I mean, in integrated design, if that's what you're promoting, it shouldn't matter.
Right.
And the idea of collaboration, which again has been a big part of the firm's history and the way that Hideo himself worked, became the mission statement. Right. And it was very simple because prior to 2018, our mission statement was something like, Sasaki is a collection of the brightest planners, urban designers, landscape architects, interiors, graphics, whatever. Nobody could remember what it was because it was too long. It was more of a description of the organization than it was any sort of mission. And we boiled it down to really, three words. Better design together. And together can mean many different things. It meant together as practitioners. It meant together with our clients. And it meant together with the communities that we were working with.
Yeah.
So trying to really embrace the idea of collaboration, not even just within our own teams, but with everyone we touched and worked with. The City Hall, depending on who you ask, is actually, let's take all subjectivity out of it.
Yeah.
Boston City Hall and City Hall Plaza, both which are one project, really. It's a brutalist architecture icon, whether you like it or not. It's very well published as part of the brutalist movement, both for its style, its materiality, its sort of honesty, and people either love it or hate it.
Yeah. Built roughly 1960s.
That's right. Yeah. Replaced the old Scully Square. So kind of in the same period of urban renewal where you're clearing out sections of a neighborhood and replacing them. And so, I think that's part of the debate is whether what it replaced, does it serve the community and is it friendly? Is it, and I think the critics of the space would also say, okay, well, we took something from somewhere else, in this case, very heavily influenced by the Piazza del Campo in Siena, right? Almost literally in terms of its form and shape, and put it into the context of the city of Boston. And Siena and Boston are obviously two different places, climates and everything. But so it's just been one of these things that's been studied and debated ever since it was built.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you guys, but there were some decisions somewhere along the way that some improvements were possible, or there was something could happen.
Yeah, and it goes back. I mean, I think that part of why you and I might have been so jaded to it is because it was literally the first project I think that every GSD core studio studied was City Hall Plaza.
Right.
And if you had gone to school in Boston like I did, you had already studied it 3 other times.
Right.
And so when the RFI was released by the city, and I think Mayor's office, I think it was 2015, 2016, we had a small group of people in the office, mostly younger folks, who said, well, we should do this. And I said, yeah, it's a request for ideas, it's unpaid, and there's no project.
Right.
And I remember feeling like, kind of with an eye roll, is this really happening? Or is this just another student project? But you know what? There was a lot of passion and energy behind the people who wanted to do it. I said, that on its own merits is worth pursuing.
Right.
And so actually some really wonderful things came out of that. So this group of really talented younger folks in the firm went out and just did some incredible work and engaged people and got opinions.
Nice.
And, really came up with the idea that there are ways to make City Hall, the building and the plaza in particular, a gathering place where it really was not. It's windswept. Those are the words that you windswept, barren, no trees.
Yes.
Lots of very good reasons, by the way, why that is, because beneath grade, there's all sorts of stuff going on.
Right.
There's subway tunnels, there's parking structures.
Right.
And so the reason there's no trees is you have very little depth in most places. You can't actually support the kind of landscape.
Right.
So,
but I think it's fair to say it can be a brutal experience to be on City Hall Plaza.
It used to be.
It used to be.
And I think the reason that Sasaki was the right firm for that work is because there's a tremendous amount of work and thought that went into what happens with everything you can't see, as well as everything you can see.
Right.
So as I mentioned, there's just all these subsurface conditions that no one knows about.
Yeah.
So I like to tell people there's $30 million buried at City Hall Plaza.
Yeah.
Because that's how much it costs to put in these underground bridges that act as support structures for the landscape above. So bridges built over tunnels, which then give enough structure to support the landscape that's above it now.
A recent unplanned was about Jane Jacobs.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's an interesting sort of how do you take a brutalist landscape and make it more human friendly, maybe. I don't know. Which would seem to be a Jane Jacobs kind of thing.
Put people in it.
Yeah, that's
for
true.
one thing. Find a way for people to be there.
Right. Yeah. So you did find it. You did find a way.
We did. Yeah, we did. And it was a challenge. It was, the budget was not infinite.
Right.
So you got to be creative, and creative in a way that maybe is different from how you're taught to think.
Right.
As a student, it's not just about a big design idea. It's actually being resourceful.
Yeah. So that's City Hall Plaza. What's one other sort of Sasaki type project you can?
That's hard to pick. Just one other.
Well, did you do some work on the Olympics?
Sure.
Yeah.
We one of the hallmark projects of the firm when I was just getting my start there was the Beijing Olympics.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Right.
And that was a competition, and that was for the 2008 games, the Summer Games. The competition itself was held in 2004, so it was just when I was arriving back to Sasaki.
Right.
And Sasaki was selected to do the overall plan for the entirety of the Olympic venues.
Wow.
And the really interesting part of that story, and I have some slides I'd like to show people of this. You go back and look at the competition entries and compared to the one that Sasaki did. Virtually every other competitor put the Olympic Stadium. So if you go to Beijing, sorry, just rewind for a second. Go to Beijing, and the Olympic venues are on just very long axis, north-south axis with a forbidden city.
Yeah, yeah.
So you have this very organized radial structure of the city with this long north-south axis. And every other design competition that was submitted put the Olympic Stadium on that axis. Sasaki put it to the side and said, what you really should do is create a really wonderful public realm that terminates in a park, supported by all these pieces, one of which is the Olympic Stadium. Yeah. And the reason that's important is that venues like an Olympic Stadium, which hold 70,000 or more people, is they're not hardly activated most of the time. When they are, of course, they're tremendously busy places.
Right.
But when they're not,
it's just empty
then
space.
all of a sudden it's a place you got to move around.
Right.
Rather than a destination. And so the success of the Beijing
you've got all
Olympics,
those windswept spaces that you have to get around. Yeah.
By the way, the Olympic Stadium, the bird's nest, everyone knows it. It's a great piece of architecture.
Sure.
Absolutely phenomenal. Didn't need to be on axis to be such a hero as a piece of architecture. And the success of the games from an economic standpoint is that whole district has continued to develop over time.
Right.
Because it's actually a place that people want to be. All you're thinking about when it comes to revenue and profit is that you're padding the pockets of the people in charge. Okay, that makes sense. But if what you're actually trying to do is invest in things that you care about and improve the quality of the work, and also make everybody at the organization happy and feel good about their work, that's not such a bad thing. That's a really good thing.
Right.
So you have to figure out how to create a culture that's not afraid to talk about money.
Right.
And that is like right there, full stop. That tends to be the thing that stops most firms from succeeding or from surviving.
And when you say that, you mean push that down through the firm so everybody...
So why is it important to them? How do they want to help generate new business? Why should they?
Yeah.
How could they? Why does it matter if your project's profitable? What will that mean for me down the line?
Right.
And if you're not open about that conversation, then why would anyone care? That's the point. The point. So for me, as I was learning, I was always sharing and saying, well, here's why I think it's important. Why would any organization want to grow? Right. I would say this at every company meeting that I could possibly.
And when you say any, you mean in your case, Sasaki? Why would Sasaki want to grow?
I mean at anyone, any business, any private business, but even in the design bit, because most firms don't tend to grow. Right. So, why would you want to? Why does that even matter? And what I tried to say to people, and from my own perspective as having gone through an organization like Sasaki, is that if we didn't grow, my career path and trajectory was limited by those who were ahead of me. In other words, the firm stays the same size, you get the same number of owners, same number of principals. Well, I'm not going to get promoted until one of them leaves, win the lottery, or something else happens. And that may not fit with my timeline. Maybe I want to buy a house. Maybe I have a family. Maybe I have got college loans I got to pay off. So right there, like that changes the conversation. And so if you could say to someone who's recently out of school and they say, well, in 5-10 years, I want to be a principal. And you say, well, that ain't going to happen because we haven't made a new principal in past 15. So, How are you going to retain them? So growing allows you to create more room for new leadership. And that's how it works.
But what you're commenting on also makes me think about, and we won't spend a lot of time on this topic because this would be a topic for another day. But AI, are you digging into that issue? Because that's going to be huge. I can imagine. Because I can imagine a computer can solve a lot of things very, very quickly that a human might take a lot longer to.
I'm not sure I would go to the extreme of saying it will solve.
But
it will. So that's where I think we get stuck a lot of times. Because there's a very binary way of thinking, especially I would say, no offense to the older generation, but I guess I'm technically part of it.
This is gray hair.
Those are older than us.
Yeah.
Even more so.
I have a gray beard now.
Well, my hair is white, my friend. So.
But
Anyways.
that's so you can do the Van Heusen ad.
Right. But there's a sort of a fear-based leadership style out there when it comes to technology and more specifically AI.
Yeah, sure.
They're going to take our jobs, right?
Right.
What are we going to do?
They are actually smarter and they will actually take the job.
Yeah. Or there's another route, which is to say, okay, look, I don't really get it. I mean, I don't know how much you've messed around with,
Absolutely zero.
Okay.
Terrified of it.
Yeah.
Anything terrified of it. Honestly.
Okay. You should unterrify yourself.
Yeah.
Because all of the things you're afraid of are not anything new.
Yeah.
You're just now finding ways to discover how much data about you exists and data about everything exists in the world. But it existed before AI. It's just now compiling all that information. So I get the fear of it.
Right.
And there's some real IP issues that organizations should be aware of. But I think the idea of embracing AI as part of the process rather than the solution is the way it's going to go.
Yeah.
It already is.
Right?
Right. So I've seen teams who will, do just really quick AI generated renderings, with text prompts to get some ideas.
Yeah.
But as you dig into these things, they're not finished concepts. You do have to have some level of expertise.
Right.
And there's also emerging practices of people who are prompt engineers who are actually learning how to use the various AI tools that are out there.
Right.
And designing prompts to generate new material. That's cool. That's interesting.
So, but it does kind of lead into another topic that we wanted to talk about, which is the design and planning education and well, you frame it for us. I mean, what's the question? Like, what's the issue? What kids are learning these days?
I mean, I'll ask the same sort of question rhetorically that I think everyone has been asking, certainly since I started in architecture school in the early 1990s, which is, what is the role of education in design? Now, your undergraduate degree is not in
at all. It was in languages and liberal arts to a T.
But you must have come to the GSD and thought, what the hell have I gotten myself into?
Yeah, I'd had an interest in policy, and then I realized that actually the policy I was most interested in, or the people I was most interested in, were people who were living in cities. That actually I was a city-focused person.
That's awesome.
And that was actually sort of the filter through which I was seeing the world. And wow, there's this profession called urban planning. Yeah. How cool is that? But the whole design component to that, even the very simple mapping, was something I had never interacted with before. And so the idea that you would actually pick up a pen and learn how to do basic sketching, basic drawing, was, to me, actually very refreshing, because it wasn't words-based, it wasn't numbers-based. You weren't running some kind of spreadsheet to figure out what the R value, blah, 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 all that stuff.
Yeah, makes sense.
But the one comment I will say about all of that was my impression at the time, which I do think, this is a thought I've had recently, or over the last few years, is that planning was very much a sort of, if we could say, a sort of nerdy profession.
Totally.
Of the guys with the button-down shirts and the khaki pants.
Yes.
And it was a type of person who became an urban planner.
Right.
And now it's a much cooler profession. It feels much more integrated into all our discussions about power and gender and race and all these kind of really hot button issues that are kind of pushing us forward.
It's because we were the pioneers, Sam.
Well, it's finally we stepped forward, and that just changed the profession.
It is so true. I knew one kid when I was an undergraduate at MIT who was in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. Right. One undergraduate, and now everyone's really interested, and for good reasons. I think it's really good. But I guess what I would say is,
can I just say, just on that thought, I remember as one of our GSD projects, we went up to meet the urban planner in Arlington, Massachusetts. And I'm sure he was a wonderful human being. We just met him. But he was exactly who we were talking about. Sort of gray hair going every direction, the button-down shirt, the LL Bean shirt, and the pants. And I thought...
Yeah, and like the most common form of planning or planners was the transportation planner.
You're right. Right.
And that makes sense with the Interstate Highway Act and all the stuff that's happened around,
Yeah.
But anyways.
Yeah.
When I was an undergraduate at MIT... the debate at that time, I think it's still going, I don't know, because I'm not as close to academia as I once was, but was that design education had a very specific role in the theory of architecture and of design, and that it was sort of sacred. You had to protect the ability of academe to explore and experiment. And anything you did that was based on what it was actually like to be an architect was forbidden.
Right.
Right. And so, it was fun, by the way.
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
great, right?
sure.
Because you
Yeah, sure.
But imagine. So my wife's a doctor, and you
Right.
know, we were together through her experience at medical school. Imagine a doctor goes to medical school, and they say, you know what? We're not going to teach you how to do medicine.
Right.
Just experiment.
Yeah, right.
And then you come out of that experience and
Right.
you're trying to cure patients.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
There's something wrong with that.
Right.
That doesn't work.
Right,
for
right.
obvious reasons.
Right.
And so I get that they're two different professions, entirely different.
Yeah.
But there's something to this.
Yeah,
Because
sure.
the idea of exploration and exploring expression without knowledge of how cities and buildings are actually built, that's just art.
Yeah, right.
That's just,
yeah.
and there's value there. Don't get me wrong. That's super valuable. It's very
Sure,
interesting.
sure.
It's very satisfying.
Yeah.
It's, it's a wonderful exploration.
Right,
But it's completely useless when you get hired.
Yeah.
So, and it also, just to go tie this back into our business discussion, we learn really bad habits as design students.
Yeah, interesting.
And this plays into the value of what we think we provide, because I don't know how many all-nighters you pull at GSD, but maybe not as many as some other kids.
Yeah, I'm sure not. I'm sure not.
Because they like me, at least the ones who were in the design programs, went to undergraduate and did a 4 or 5 year bachelor's degree.
Right.
And what you learn through Design Studio is that your work is never done.
Yeah.
And you must work at all times, at all hours, until you have time is up.
Yeah.
What have we learned? Well, is the return on every hour invested equal, or does it diminish over time? Well, I think we can all agree you're not doing the best work at 4 a.m.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So probably not getting a return on that investment.
Right.
And your time is really worthless.
Right.
Nobody cares.
Yeah.
I don't care you didn't sleep. You know?
Right.
I don't care that it's Thanksgiving break. You know.
Right.
So you come into the profession being taught that your time is meaningless.
Right.
And now all of a sudden you got to fill out a timesheet.
Yes.
And assign a fee to that. So you've really learned some bad business habits.
Interesting.
It's a big problem. It's actually a huge problem. Okay, so let's not be extremist. I'm not saying that you have to change the entire paradigm of how we teach design.
Right.
But here's one simple way. Do you ever watch Project Runway? You remember that show?
Oh yeah. I love that show.
So, right.
Absolutely love that show.
It may still be going. I don't know. But
so
I used to
creative.
watch it, right?
So creative.
So from your memory, how are they asked to run their projects?
They were given a design problem.
Yeah.
There's sometimes very limited information, and then they had to come up with a design answer to that problem. And they had a certain amount of time.
Yes.
And then they had to produce or show their
And
product.
what happens at 10, 11 o'clock at night?
Oh, they would didn't they close the studio? They would close the
They
studio.
have only a certain amount of time to do their job.
Yeah, that's right.
Isn't that just
That's right.
about how
That's
the
right.
profession actually works? So,
Right.
So imagine, instead of the studio environment saying, okay,
Right.
we're gonna meet 3 times a week or 2 times a week, 4 hours each time. You're gonna spend your life for the next 2-3 years living in this space.
Right.
What if they said, all right, we have a project and you have 30 hours to complete it.
Right.
And we're going to come in and make sure you're all gone at 11 o'clock each night.
Yeah.
And you need to write a plan, and you need to tell me how you're going to allocate your time. Because you know what? That's how projects work.
Right.
So when you come out of school and I'm your project manager and I say, okay, we have 3 weeks to get this done. I'm going to assign you 16 hours a week. So and I'll have regular check-ins. You're like,
right. Exactly. Right.
How do I do that?
Right. Exactly. This is what I was. Exactly. Yeah. Tell you.
16 hours, which means how many hours in a week?
Yeah. Right.
How many projects should I be working on?
It's
a panic. You don't know what the hell you're doing.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
We could teach that one thing. That one very simple thing in design school is how to allocate your time.
Right.
And how to actually write a design budget and plan. Just time-based. Forget about the money. That's huge. Massive.
Yeah.
Massive.
It's true.
But it's just something we've never seen happen. So why not? I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I would change. And I also just feel like we are taught as students to be planners or architects
Yeah.
or landscape architects.
Yeah.
But very quickly in the profession, you are, for some reason, told that you have to be a very specific kind of planner or landscape architect.
Interesting. Yeah.
You know, I am an architect in the healthcare
Yes, right.
market.
Sure. Right.
I'm a planner and I only work on public projects.
Yeah.
I'm a landscape architect and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
do built work for parks. I don't know, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And we've forgotten who we are as professionals.
Right.
And I think that's kind of weird. So I always tried to do everything. You know, my entire time at Sasaki, I refused to work in any one market.
Yeah.
I wanted to work on projects that I've never done before.
Yeah.
Because for me, it was the most resilient, for myself, resilient plan I could think of. Because if I was doing private developer work for large-scale mixed-use communities, and then, you know, as the current market indicates, some of those projects just dry up, what are you going to do?
Right.
I would pivot to higher ed, where I also had some experience.
Right.
When there were a lot of really interesting publicly funded regional planning projects through the Obama administration, I was doing those.
Yeah.
And when
That's
those were amazing.
That's
when
so
those
cool.
went away, I had to turn to the private sector.
Yeah.
And so but I was always a planner.
Right.
Yeah.
We're going to put in a little plug for somebody we also had on Unplanned a while ago during COVID time, which is the Sasaki Foundation, which is and give us 30 seconds. They're doing a lot of great stuff, and it deals with this issue of how do we broaden out the field, how do we make sure it's much more inclusive. That's one of the things that's really fascinating about design and urban stuff in general is it really does, it impacts all of us, no matter our income level, our race, our background, blah, 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 blah. But sometimes the design planning professions have been quite a smaller group of people making those decisions about how it's going to work.
And I left out the foundation when we were talking earlier about some of the things that happened since that period in 2018, but that was one of them actually.
Oh, interesting.
And it was in that year, in fact, when we took a look at the foundation, which has been around since the year 2000. That's when Hideo Sasaki passed.
Right.
The foundation was created in his honor, and it was primarily funded by friends, family, and firm principals. And it had done work over the years to fund scholarships at the BAC or do research. But, you know, really just kind of a very small, tight group. And we felt like, given Hideo Sasaki's role in the profession as a Japanese-American landscape architect, I mean, think about that, right?
Sure.
Somebody who was put in the internment camps,
Yes.
literally pulled out of school. He was at UC Berkeley, and then he got literally put in an internment camp, found his way back to school, eventually becomes the dean of the landscape architecture program at Harvard and starts this firm. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
How do you take the lessons learned from that period of time and apply them to the needs of the industry today? And so it may look a little bit different, but it would be still in the spirit of what Hideo represented through his legacy and his practice. And so in 2018, we looked at the mission of the foundation and said, we need to extend the power of design, right? The mission of the foundation became the power of design belongs to all of us. Because, again, if we're looking at the industry as a whole, it's a very privileged exercise when you think about it.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
Not, who can afford to hire a firm like Sasaki?
Exactly.
Well, not necessarily the people who need it. At all times. And so the foundation really tried to do two things, which was to say, how do we engage grassroots community groups who have a great idea or a need or both, but don't have the resources or the visibility, and give them a boost through some funding, but also through partnership with the firm to develop their ideas and go out and actually tell a story to make those projects a reality. And then the second, which was very close to Hideo himself, was design education. And how do we get more kids involved in this profession that lacks diversity? And so every firm will tell you, well, diversity is a priority, but there's no one to hire. I mean, we look at who's in the design schools, who's graduating, they all look like me. Well, okay, how are you going to change that? You got to go to middle schools, you got to go to high schools, and you have to, you know, help people see that this profession can be for them. Because most kids don't see it that way. So
no, it's super exciting.
Yeah.
The thought that was in my head earlier, which has now bounced back into my head, is, and we're back at Sasaki for a half a second here, but any large firm, and frankly anybody who's kind of working at that scale, there must be a huge amount of pride. I mean, not just on the business side, but you are shaping cities, which is kind of amazing. Like that building, that plaza, that streetscape, that street alignment will be there, could be there for a long, long time, probably a long, long time.
Yeah, that's what makes it such an interesting and rewarding profession, I think. When you do it right.
Yeah. All right. So on that note, one or two things to fix Boston.
Yeah. It's two things that I would say, but they're related.
Okay.
And it's on everyone's mind anyways.
Yeah.
It's transit and it's housing.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
all right.
Those are the things, right?
But just let that. No, you're gonna.
No,
you're gonna dig. Yeah, yeah.
To.
No. Tell us.
Let it hang and
Tell us. No, Michelle Wu, mayor of Boston. Just check
Boston's
in on
a funny place, right?
Right.
I mean, it's a funny place. So
right.
Let me just start with my own personal experience. I live in the city of Newton. Right. Wonderful place. Why did I pick Newton?
I don't
know. Lots of reasons.
Yep.
It's a beautiful place with historic neighborhoods, but it's built around these villages, most of which are transit oriented, because I can walk to the T. I can walk to the Green Line, and my kids can walk to the Green Line, and they can go downtown and come back and be safe and not have to get in a car. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Yeah. Good
schools, good open space, whatever. There's a lot but the transit was a big deal for me.
Yeah.
Because a lot of other communities like Newton that don't have transit. So that was a big part of it for me. What I find completely mysterious and absolutely aggravating in the current world is all of the resistance to building density around these transit stations.
Right.
And Massachusetts is a really funny place in my mind because we were super progressive, generally speaking. And there's a lot of debate around home rule and what that means and whether it's a barrier or whether, but every community has certain abilities to do things so long as it doesn't, conflict with state laws. But the amount of pushback that these Transit Communities Act, the MBTA Communities Act, is unreal, right? Every community, including where I live, is fighting against anything over 3 stories adjacent to transit.
Right.
Okay. Now I invite anyone to go to places like Toronto. Or Toronto, if you want to be like, that's how they say it.
It's Toronto.
Or Vancouver, right? And I think Toronto's been working in the province of Ontario in particular has been working on increasing what is already super dense development around existing transit stations.
Right.
Because the number one way to fix transit is not through policy. It's not through the signal repairs or track repairs or all the bullshit we're going through. Yeah. It's ridership.
Right.
And how do you get ridership?
Right.
You gotta have demand. It's really basic. And so
that and ground floor retail too. It's like, how do you get ground floor retail? So you need people who actually will go and buy stuff.
So you listen to these public meetings and people are afraid of this density because they're afraid of giving up what they think their privilege is. But they don't. I
just had somebody from Lexington rip into me about the fact they were going to potentially produce 1,000 units of housing near transit or
well, you know what? I wish we could fast forward into the future and see that same person sitting at a restaurant or enjoying a cafe, or feeling like they're walking down the street in a very safe environment because there's lots of other people.
Right.
That's what happens.
Right.
It's a good thing.
Right.
And I just can't. It just aggravates me.
I can say from here, which we're near Porter Square in Cambridge. Roughly speaking, in discussion or in construction or already completed. Probably 300 or 400 units have gone in the last 10 years or so. Just within this sort of quarter mile.
That's a drop in the bucket. I mean, that's great, right? That's a drop in the bucket.
Right.
And if you don't fix the transit and housing problem, then the affordability problem continues.
Right.
The employment problem continues. I love all the things that we're doing in this administration around clean energy and clean tech and all the startups and all that's great. Fantastic. They're all going to leave. Because there's nowhere for their employees to live. They can't get to work. So it's a fool's errand. It really is. You've got to focus on housing first. That enables transit. That solves everything else. If you want my honest opinion. But housing first. More of it.
Mayor Wu, you heard it here first. So just make a note.
And every other mayor in every other city around Boston.
Exactly. Actually, it's probably there. That's really where the challenge.
That's really where it is.
Yeah. That's where the challenge is. Because they got the train for free. But when you get the people, they don't want that.
That's right.
And that seems a little... there was a lot of that discussion about Alewife, development at Alewife. It was like, well, you've had the red line for a while.
Build it up.
Yeah. Well, James Miner, thank you for being on Unplanned. So you'll stay based in Boston. It sounds like this organization is based somewhere else, but you'll be here in Boston.
It's primarily based in Atlanta, but I'll be here. And let's keep doing it.
I would love to have you back on. That would be great. I mean, maybe we could... think of some episodes we could do, which would be great.
That'd be fun. Maybe we could go on site somewhere.
I would love to. That is exactly what I would love to do. And use the camera to help us show to viewers what we're talking
Yeah.
about. So they don't just have to hear it from us. They can actually see it with their own two eyes. It'd be great.
I love it. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, it's great having you.
Good to see you.